From the world's largest paper company that makes a third of America's cardboard boxes, to the pizza delivery brands dominating a $17 billion industry. We traveled the world to learn about products Americans spend billions on every year. Last year, the world's biggest paper company did over $16 billion in sales in the US alone. This mill in Georgia is just one of hundreds of facilities operated by International Paper. It runs 24/7 to meet demand from online shopping, grocery stores, and more. But no one in this industry would call their product cardboard.
Why don't you like to use the word cardboard?
Because it's not cardboard.
Insiders call it corrugated packaging, a wavy layer sandwiched between two flat outer sheets. But yeah, most people call it cardboard. Making it starts with living trees. Forester Alex Singleton walked us through an area whose trees were sold to International Paper 2 years ago.
It has since been replanted with longleaf pine.
But it will still take decades for the new crop to mature.
For many foresters, we only see a site harvested once during our careers. From this stage to there would probably be around 30 years.
After harvesting, landowners make money selling their trees to different industries, which makes them into things like lumber, telephone poles, and of course, paper. The idea is to turn forests into an investment, so more people plant and maintain them.
Without young, healthy forests, our industry could not be successful. I don't view logging or clear cutting as negative, it's just the start of a process.
But critics say that replanting trees is not the same as letting them grow.
This is one of the most industrial and heavily logged forests on the planet.
The southern US, sometimes called America's wood basket, is home to 2% of the world's forested land. Yet it produces nearly 20% of our pulp and paper products, which either means it's highly productive or highly exploited, depending on who you ask. On a typical day, about 300 trucks loaded with freshly cut trees drive up to this mill. The first stop is the wood yard. Some of the trees are set aside into these massive piles, which ensure the mill can sustain round-the-clock operations. They come from farms and forests within 120 miles. A sprinkler keeps them wet so they stay fresh and to reduce the risk of fire. A crane scoops trees from the pile and drops them into a machine that knocks off the bark.
With a debarking drum, you're removing bark. I tell kids, similar to like a potato peeler.
This process creates tons of leftover bark, which will be burned for energy. The debarked trunks travel through a chipper and pile up here.
On that wood chip pile, we can keep up to around 100,000 tons of chips.
It'll only take the mill about 10 days to work through this mountain. A conveyor belt feeds into the next step, pulping. Pine is made of long, stringy fibers held together by a natural glue-like material called lignin. Paper makers want the fibers, but not the glue, so they use steam and chemicals to dissolve it. The reaction can create gas that smells like sulfur. If you've ever noticed a rotten odor while driving by a paper plant, that's probably why. International Paper says its plants are built to capture a lot of those gases, which cuts down on smell. The fibers are covered in a toxic mix of chemicals and tree residue, so they have to be cleaned.
That liquor that's washed off gets evaporated and consolidated and goes into what we call a recovery boiler.
In other words, the plant burns those goopy leftovers, creating steam and chemicals that can go back through the process and save energy.
We're really plants inside of a plant, so we have our own chemical plant, our own power plant.
In fact, this mill makes about 75% of its own energy on site. IP is also burning less coal than it used to, which helps cut down on factory emissions. But trees hold a lot of carbon. And the company's own sustainability report says carbon released by processing the trees was more than double its emissions from burning fossil fuels in 2022. Before the pulp becomes paper, workers add used cardboard to the mix. Old packaging gets a new start in this warehouse.
The boxes that we use here in the recycle plant come from local retailers and grocery stores up to a 300-mile radius from the mill.
Katie Fries has worked in this recycling mill for 3 years. She says people still have a lot of misconceptions about the process.
Our process is designed to take out the stuff like grease and tape. Just recycle any corrugated box you have, whether it has tape on it or food in it. It can be used to make paper again. Then you can recycle a pizza box.
Every day, this mill recycles 500 tons of used cardboard. Each ton saves trees, energy, and water. Saving water is key because nearly every step of papermaking uses lots of it. The used cardboard also gets pulped, using water and chemicals, then mixes with fresh fibers. Workers simply call this massive contraption the paper machine. It presses the pulp flat and squeezes out water. Then it sends the mixture through a series of dryers, heated to over 200 degrees Fahrenheit.
As that goes down the machine, the sheet gets drier and drier.
And after all that, you still only have paper. To become corrugated packaging, the rolls head to a box plant, like this one in Illinois. Here, flexible paper becomes sturdy boxes.
The heartbeat of the plant is the corrugator.
Corrugating is how the packaging's middle layer gets that distinctive wavy shape. The waves are actually called flutes, and they're what gives this type of packaging its strength.
There are different types of flutes. Smaller ones print better, aren't as good for stacking strength, and the larger ones don't print as well, but they're better for stacking strength.
This plant can make boxes in over 1.6 million different designs.
The smallest box I've ever made was about the size of a ring box. The largest box I've ever made in one of my facilities was for a washing machine.
After gluing the layers together, finishing touches include printing on graphics and cutting the sheets into their final shapes. To save space, most boxes shipped to customers flat, and any trimmings or waste pieces can be recycled right back into the process. In the US, more than 70% of used cardboard gets recycled, which is much higher than the rates for aluminum, glass, or plastic.
Corrugating paper is easy to recycle because the supply chain supports it, so there's value in it.
It also helps that nearly 80% of Americans can recycle it using bins right on their curbs. So why does the industry still use up so many trees? Part of it is that old cardboard can't be recycled indefinitely. The EPA says it can only go through the process about 7 times. Each time it goes through pulping and blending, the long, strong pine fibers get a bit shorter and weaker. And eventually, the degraded paper bits simply wash through the screens and out of the process. So recycling is very important. But even if 100% of boxes got reused, making new ones would still mean cutting down trees. Some experts say the big question is whether the industry manages forests responsibly. International Paper gets more than 90% of its fiber from trees in the southern US, where the vast majority of woodlands are on private property.
What we do is we provide a viable market for that landowner's trees such that they will have the income or revenue to be able to pay for the reforestation that takes place on their lands.
Foresters and paper companies argue that without that market, people might just sell their land, potentially losing forests forever to agriculture, parking lots, or other uses. Data from the University of Maryland shows that tree cover in the US today is about the same as it was in the year 2000.
For me, as a forester, it must mean that we're doing our job right, that we're taking care of the environment, that we're promoting forest growth.
But measuring forest area is complicated. To start, not everyone agrees what a forest even is.
Pine plantations are not forests. Those are tree farms that lack the diversity, the structural diversity, the biological diversity that a lot of these species depend on.
An environmental nonprofit called the Dogwood Alliance says that tree farms have been replacing natural forests. That could potentially have a global impact. Some experts estimate that natural forests are 40 times better than plantations at storing carbon, which makes them crucial to slowing climate change. Forests have lots of other benefits too, like filtering our drinking water and reducing erosion. Certain forestry techniques, like leaving some large trees in place, can help planted forests retain those benefits.
I think there are ways to sustainably manage forests without taking out the larger trees and completely destroying the structural complexity of a forest. But that takes really skilled, targeted forestry, and that's not always what happens.
Ultimately, the world uses a lot of paper, which has to come from somewhere. You might see certifications stamped on boxes. Those are supposed to indicate they're made of trees that were harvested sustainably. International Paper says that more than 30% of the fibers it used in 2022 came from forests with one of those certifications.
I think there is a way for industry and conservation to coexist in southern forests, but there has to be a good faith effort on all sides.
Hot sauce is a $1.5 billion market in America. Here's how one of the top brands, Tabasco, makes all their hot sauce on a tiny island in Louisiana.
Tabasco grows peppers just for seeds inside this greenhouse.
We're also looking for the plants that produce the richest color red peppers at perfect size, and then flavor too.
Christian Brown is the great-great-great-grandson of founder Edmund McElhenney and the company's agriculture manager.
Yeah, everything's looking good. No signs of aphids.
He sends only the strongest seeds to over 1,000 Tabasco farms around the world. Tabasco says their peppers originate from the Amazon in South America. They're about 6 times hotter than a jalapeno, and they're tiny, only 1 to 1.5 inches long and weighing a gram each. Because the peppers are so small and easily damaged, machines don't do the harvesting.
They're all hand-picked.
Tabasco harvests 10 million pounds of peppers a year. This footage is from Louisiana, but the process looks similar abroad. They sprinkle salt on the peppers and use a giant machine to mash them into a paste. Farms ship the paste back to Avery Island through the port of New Orleans.
This mash is actually from Peru. We have 50,000 pounds of Tabasco mash inside that container bulked in.
This pump siphons the paste into white oak barrels. Some are 60 years old.
Most of these barrels in here are essentially a used bourbon barrel.
Why white oak?
I don't really have the answer. I know it works, and we've been doing it 150 plus years, so I'm not changing it.
A team works together to fill and seal each one. One truckload will fill up to 110 barrels, but they can't overfill them because
If you have too much pressure, sometimes those caps blow off. Sometimes the lids will pop off overnight. It's a really simple fix. Just kind of move it to the barrel next to it.
it can take 30 minutes to finish one row. Since they're old, the barrels don't have a perfect seal, so workers pour salt on top. It lets gases escape while limiting oxidation.
Salt on top is just an extra protective layer. There is an imperfection that will help.
The team stacks each barrel by mash origin.
So this whole bay here, going as far back as you can to get to the walls, is about 1,100 barrels of Columbia 2022.
The mash releases lots of gases during fermentation, so a tiny valve on top helps relieve the pressure.
You have to have some ventilation process or it's going to explode.
And that happens sometimes.
It's like a Tabasco ghost. They come in here at night and they pop the lids off, and we come back and there's 6 or 7 we have to fix.
After 3 years, the mash inside will stabilize, shrink, and darken in color.
We can see that it was filled to about this level here, and you can start to see rings on the side of that barrel where the mash is going down.
Even though it's shrunk, the aged mash is still really spicy.
No coughing?
Not yet, not yet, but it is hot. So let's remember, this is 10 times more hot than actual sauce.
Next up, the aged mash is pumped into the blending room. Here, the pepper smell will hit you right in the back of the throat.
I could say like getting maced, I guess, every day. It can really hit you hard. But that's how I put my kids through college, so I'm good with that. I love it.
Morris Montgomery oversees blending, but he goes by Nook. The Army veteran ensures all the sauce tastes the same, even though it's coming from around the world.
I try to do it 3 or 4 different countries and put them together. So it could be like a little Colombia, Peru, and a little Ecuador and Honduras.
He pumps in vinegar and blends it all for up to 28 days. 72 tanks mix at the same time. Strainers remove pepper pulp and seeds. Nook will take a sample for the lab to test for pH, and then...
This is finished Tabasco sauce, and this is ready to go. Next step to the bottling floor.
That's where John Simmons comes in.
And I'm also a member of the 6th generation of the McElhenney family to make Tabasco sauce.
John's factory fills up to 700,000 bottles every day, from minis to the iconic 5-ounce one. It also pumps out 9 different flavors, from original red to habanero. Sriracha is the company's fastest growing one. Today, machines do most of the filling, capping, and labeling.
So a bottle is going to go through in about 13 minutes.
They gather the bottles and package them into cardboard boxes.
We're doing it really fast at like 300 bottles a minute.
Next, the shipping room.
So we've got product for Germany, Japan, Sweden, Taiwan, the Canary Islands, South Africa.
Typically, all these newly packaged products leave the warehouse within 3 weeks. While the sauce is definitively global, Avery Island has always been home. This was where founder and former banker Edmund McElhenney first grew the tiny red peppers. He bottled his first hot sauce in 1868, sealed it with wax, and sold just under 700 bottles around the Gulf Coast. Each one cost $1. He named the brand Tabasco, after the Mexican state known for spice production and exports. Edmund got a patent for it, and by the early 1870s was selling his bottles across the US and even in Europe.
And then it kind of started to take a little steam and get bigger and bigger.
In one 24-hour period, we're going to double and then some more of what Edmund did in his entire life.
Edmund lived on Avery Island, which is a natural salt dome rising 163 feet above sea level. As the highest point along the U.S. Gulf Coast, it's been a respite from raging hurricanes for the McElhenney descendants that still call the island home. But it's now at risk. Louisiana's coast sinks by an average of 1/3 of an inch per year. On average, between 1985 and 2010, the state lost roughly a football field of wetlands every hour. When land sinks, it's more vulnerable to storm damage.
It changes drastic from storm to storm, depending where it makes landfall at. You can see the marsh deteriorate.
Heath Romero is Avery Island's land manager. He said when Hurricane Rita hit in 2005, it turned this island into a lake, and parts of the marsh were destroyed. After Rita, the company built an 18-foot levee with a pump system around the factory.
We put in water control structures to stop the salt water from getting to the cypress trees.
They also planted tall grasses for protection.
And you can see we recovered all of this marsh that was open water at one time.
But it's a slow-moving process, especially as the home of Tabasco enters another hurricane season.
You can't wait for somebody else to help you. You have to take action in your own self and try and protect what you have.
Last year, America spent $16.5 billion on pizza deliveries. Here's how Domino's became the biggest pizza brand in the U.S.
Each year, Domino's slings out about 1 billion pizzas globally.
They have been one of the most successful public companies since around 2009, 2010.
The company can keep pizza cheap because it controls its entire supply chain, from dough making to delivery. In the US, it all depends on bustling production and distribution centers. Back in 2018, we filmed at an older center in Connecticut with a more manual dough process. There, it took hours longer to make and chill pizza dough than at Domino's newest and heavily automated Indiana center.
Now we have robots, so it's more efficient, it's more consistent.
This 110,000 square foot location opened in October 2022 and reportedly cost the company $50 million.
We're constantly moving. From the second that we start, we're go, go, go.
While some centers still measure ingredients by hand, at the new ones, mixing machines pump in flour, water, oil, salt, and sugar directly from storage.
And then we have a secret recipe, prepackaged recipe. I cannot tell you what's in our top secret ingredient because we wouldn't be able to let you go out of here.
The new facility can churn out 50 batches of dough a day.
That's 88,000 pizzas for our customers daily.
Dough has a shelf life to it, and we don't freeze it. We constantly have to make it, so it's nonstop.
Workers in this new center mostly control the computers, pull samples for quality control, and troubleshoot any issues with the machines.
We don't like to stop. So basically, if there's anything that goes on during the day, we're meant to clean out the problems fast, efficiently, and get them going so the line never stops.
Workers can program the machine to pop out different size dough balls for small, medium, or large pizzas.
And I just changed that tube out to give us a little bit smaller dough ball.
And then robots place the dough balls onto trays. That's another update, as this used to be done by hand.
9 years ago, it was team members that were placing that. So just imagine how hard that was on our team members. This has made it a lot less physical, and we're able to attract a lot more talent.
A set of cameras makes sure the dough balls don't stick together.
It's literally taking pictures of it. If it catches any mistakes with our placing, this right here will reject each tray.
This machine applies a label to each tray
to identify what kind of dough it was and when it was made.
Behold the spiral chiller. About 3,000 feet of conveyor belts can cool 40,000 trays of dough at once.
There isn't a cooler bigger than the one that you see behind me. We're able to hold 2 days worth of production, and that gives us the ability to have dough in case of we need to support other supply chain centers.
They don't want to freeze it because then it would stop the dough from proofing, or the rising that happens when yeast is activated. So they chill it down to 38 degrees to slow the proofing process.
It's very cold in here. Our trays go up for 30 minutes and they come down for 30 minutes.
The dough used to take 4 hours to cool. Now with the spiral chiller, it takes just 1. The dough balls travel down another conveyor belt. Then sensors tell these robots to stack them 25 trays high. A much faster process than the original way of doing it. The machine also slides a dolly cart under each stack to easily move them.
This is the end of the line. We double check that each tray has a label, then you push it.
Here, 6 different kinds of dough. Handmade pan, hand-tossed extra large, large, medium, small, and wheat for school lunches await orders from franchises. And they have to move fast to prepare for the biggest pizza holiday, the Super Bowl.
We normally see a 30% increase, so normally we go from producing 500,000 dough balls to 750,000 dough balls a week.
Noé says with all this automation, the center was able to cut hours off its dough-making time. And this production process requires fewer employees, an important feature of the new facility. Because less than a year into the pandemic, Domino's came face to face with the labor crisis gripping the entire food industry. By early 2021, the U.S. restaurant industry was down 1.2 million workers. And there were lots of reasons why. Some workers retired, some quit, some trained for jobs in other sectors, and some relied on unemployment benefits. Employees left warehouse and delivery jobs at record rates.
Domino's, in particular, was having a hard time fulfilling these roles that are not super high paying and are pretty strenuous to work.
Warehouse conditions can be tough.
In the summertime, this dry warehouse area, it can get super hot. We do have fans and we have other things to keep people cool and hydrated, but it can get super hot.
That's where they keep the pizza sauce, dipping cups, barbecue sauce, pizza boxes, and the world's most controversial topping.
Pineapple, for all those pineapple pizza lovers. The one area that we're looking into right here is our freezer, which is below 0 in temperature.
This freezer stores the cheese, all the meat toppings, and chicken wings. The veggie freezer holds just that, mushrooms, onions, and peppers, and a cooler stores the pepperoni.
Staffing has been a real challenge across, again, the whole industry.
So it's this kind of vicious cycle. When you can't hire enough people, it creates a lot of different problems throughout the business.
So here in Indiana, Domino's implemented new processes to make warehouse and delivery jobs easier on employees' bodies. At older centers, goods would be bulk loaded onto trucks. So when drivers got to franchises, they had a mini grocery store and would pick out ingredients from each shop. But at the new centers, Domino's has added a whole picking team. They grab all the ingredients and load them into cages. Each store gets its own cage,
which is just efficient and faster and easier.
The wheels on these carts make it so smooth to go in and out.
So when the drivers pull up, the pre-picked loads are waiting for them.
This is where we do stage all of our product for loading.
Workers move all the rolling cages and dough dollies onto 48-foot refrigerated trucks.
We come in and we place the carts in from left to right, just into the truck. We'll strap it every 5 rows or so to give it a support brace to hold everything in tight. We're heavily strapped in. It goes a long way to get the pizza to you.
On average, 13 stores worth of goods can fit in just one truck.
We do a lot of things that are kind of like Tetris here.
The center dispatches about 28 trailers. They supply over 300 stores across 5 states. Domino's wanted the new center to take the load off older supply chain centers.
All those centers were over capacity.
Most drivers are dispatched overnight to avoid traffic and crowded parking lots.
We're actually just left the center. We're heading out to one of the franchisee stores, gonna make their delivery. My wife laughs at me every time because when I go to parallel park my car, she's like, why you put it up so much? I'm like, because I drive the truck more than I drive my car. And I got a little bitty car too. So you could just imagine how many wide turns I'm doing in my little bitty car. When the coronavirus hit, a lot of people weren't coming out.
They got so bad, Domino's launched a program to send employees from anywhere else in the company to driving school.
We're arriving now. The store's right here on the left-hand side. It has a store number, the stop number, so it's very easy to know what store is getting what. So these are dough trays. We take the old ones, bring the new ones in, so it's just a cycle.
The new picking and caging systems have taken some of the physical stress off truckers.
Now everything's pre-picked, so they've really made our job 100% easier and better and safer as well. Our on-time status is improved a lot as far as the delays. We're only at a store 15 minutes versus an hour.
So was all of Domino's investment in new tech worth it? Fast food correspondent Kate Taylor says yes.
It is working. Kind of all of these solutions they found are working pretty well, and at this point, the labor shortage is kind of abating a little bit.
And Domino's has held on to its title of the biggest pizza chain in the world. It's nearly doubled its global store count in the last decade, and passed Pizza Hut in sales in 2018.
Domino's was basically able to steal a bunch of Pizza Hut customers.
But what does all this automation mean for the future of human jobs in fast food?
Automation is no longer an if, it's a when for fast food. There's definitely money to be made in using robots instead of humans.
And Domino's is not alone. White Castle already uses robots on some fry stations, and Jack in the Box is soon to follow. Robots are popping up in some KFCs and are set to start cooking chicken. And McDonald's is testing AI to take drive-through orders. Domino's itself has trialed self-driving cars to deliver pizza.
If there is a robot that can do something for a lower price point than hiring people to do it, companies are going to jump on that.
Which leads to the age-old concern. Could robots take people's jobs?
I personally don't think automating is an evil move. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Kate says some of the lost jobs are actually okay to lose.
Stacking boxes again and again and again, it can lead to injuries. Automating jobs that are repetitive, that are dangerous for workers, that are even just straight boring, that allows people to have the opportunity to have better jobs at a company. And I think that that's also something that shouldn't be villainized.
What hasn't become robotic is Domino's in-store experience.
You can't automate everything. Making the pizza will stay human.
The company does have that hand-tossed slogan to live up to. Pizza chefs pull the proof dough out of the fridge and still make every pie by hand.
We're going to start with some fresh dough. Pull it out there, stick it in the cornmeal. You want to make sure you make a pencil rim. Reduces the air in the dough.
Jessica ladles on a thin layer of tomato sauce.
Next, you move on to the cheesing phase. You wanna make sure you stay away from the middle. Hit all even amounts.
She drops on about 40 slices of pepperoni for a large pizza.
It goes through the oven, takes about 6.5 minutes, and then it'll come out on the other side.
A squeeze of garlic oil on the crust finishes off the pie.
And then you close the box. And it's all complete.
But just because there aren't any robots tossing pizza, doesn't mean there isn't a hustle.
Ready, set, go! Nice job, Jessica.
It's important to go fast, I think, for the customer aspect, because when they're placing an order, they're hungry. You know, every pizza is a rush. Fastest pizza I've ever made is a large pepperoni in 25 seconds.
It's all hands on deck. Super Bowl is one of the top 3 busiest days for Domino's Pizza. And before you ask, 59% of customers are going to order pepperoni.
And stores like this one haven't been spared from the worst of the labor crunch.
Like any cinnamon twist with that today? Sure, that's fine.
Now, there are challenges with staffing, retention. There is the competition of, all those other delivery businesses that want to take our drivers.
At the very end of the process, the hot pies finally head out for delivery. Today, still by humans in fleets of electric cars. But maybe tomorrow, in driverless ones.
We're going to keep trucking the product to our customers and get it done.
The U.S. hearing aid market was valued at $2.7 billion in 2022. So why do only 20% of American adults that need the devices have them?
38 to 48 million Americans have some degree of hearing loss. That's about the population of Canada or Spain. Right now, only about 20% of adults in the US who need a hearing aid actually have one. And believe it or not, there's only one traditional hearing aid manufacturer that's US owned and operated. Starkey was founded in 1967. Since then, it's produced tens of millions of these devices.
Starkey has over 5,000 employees. We do business in over 100 countries, and we change people's lives through better hearing.
It's a big business that begins with the tiniest of measurements. Inside Starkey's headquarters, a silicone impression of the ear goes through a 3D scanner that captures all of its unique dimensions. The machine prints out an acrylic shell, which holds all of the electronic components. And a special software helps the technician determine how to create the smallest, most comfortable hearing aid for that patient's ear and prescription. Since the final customized product is assembled by hand, the whole process can take up to 4 days. For Chef Paul Nye, some of the features of his Starkey hearing aid have been essential for his work in the kitchen.
I can answer my phone while I'm cutting fish. I don't have to touch anything. I don't have to stop what I'm doing to actually talk to people.
Chef Paul got his first hearing aids 14 years ago.
It almost was like you were in a Chuck E. Cheese where there's so many lights, bells, whistles going on.
But high costs are part of the reason why many adults haven't gotten them. Right now, a set of hearing aids in the US could cost anywhere from $700 to $10,000.
So the device is about 1/3 of the cost, but then you have the services which you really need.
There are also limited options.
There really only are 5 major hearing aid companies in the world, and they're very highly integrated in that you might hear many different brand names of hearing aids, but it's really 5 companies controlling the whole thing.
During the pandemic, the hearing aid industry saw an unexpected surge.
I think when you have something like universal masking, so many more people realized how much they rely actually on subconscious lip reading.
And the industry is also going through another big change. Legislation for over-the-counter hearing aids passed in 2017. Tech companies like Bose and Apple are entering the market. But Starkey points out that these over-the-counter devices will only be for those with mild to moderate hearing loss, and that most Americans will still need personalized fittings and expert care. The number of people with hearing loss in the US is expected to nearly double by 2060 as the population of elderly people grows. And studies have shown that when left untreated, it has much more dire consequences on overall health.
You strain so much in hearing that actually I was physically shaking and I couldn't figure out why. And then I got the hearing aids and then everything just stopped. The stress level to hear was just gone.
As the industry opens up, the hope is that any barriers to addressing hearing loss will fall, and that these devices will become more accessible for everyone.
In 2021, Americans spent over $2 billion on houseplants. But half of those plants die before they even make it home.
Costa Farm here in Miami produces 1.6 million plants every week. The company supplies giant retailers like Home Depot, Walmart, IKEA, and Whole Foods. This is Mike. He's the production manager.
We're here at our soil processing plant. This is the beginning of the growing cycle.
Mike makes a living keeping plants healthy.
That's the main goal, to keep it alive.
But at this scale, that's not always easy. Costa has to maintain the perfect ratio of light, water, temperature, and food.
We can only deal with the natural factors.
Every grower will lose some plants along the way. That's what the industry calls shrinkage. But Costa has taken steps to minimize it. It all starts with this potting mix. Costa uses coconut coir, which comes from the fibrous middle part of the fruit.
Nosotros recibimos el coco de la India, casi todo viene de Sri Lanka.
This is a more sustainable alternative than peat moss, which releases carbon dioxide when harvested and takes a long time to grow back.
We're just talking about millimeters or fractions of millimeters of growth a year.
After the coconut coir arrives at Costa, these machines rehydrate it. It's then ground and mixed with wood fibers. This machine drops the soil mixture and fertilizer into pots. Workers gently flatten the soil by hand to get an even spread. Costa says this recipe gives plants the best chance of survival until they reach store shelves. Next, the pots head over to the production area to get their young plants. These are cuttings taken from the stems of more mature plants. These workers place the cuttings into pots. They're fragile, so they have to move fast.
La idea es que la planta no sufra estrés. Mientras más rápido sea el proceso, es mejor. Tenemos menos pérdida en el campo.
During this process, growers nationally lose an average of 20% of their plants, although Costa says it loses half that. Another reason plants die? Disease and pests. The biggest concern are spider mites and mealybugs.
They're sucking the juices out of it. The leaf is not able to get the proper nutrition.
Workers inspect every plant. If they spot any spider mites, they fire up this fancy gun, which is actually a repurposed leaf blower. The dust that comes out is full of bigger, predatory mites.
Lo que vamos a hacer ahora es soltar estos depredadores, que son un insecto beneficioso para nuestras plantas.
Predatory mites don't hurt the plants or people. but instead feed on the dangerous spider mites. They're also a safer alternative to pesticides. Afterwards, this giant sprinkler moves through to water them.
This plant now will spend its life cycle growing here.
Costa then hardens off some of its plants to avoid any more shrinkage. That means towards the end of the growth cycle, growers starve the plants of humidity, light, and water. The goal? To mimic conditions indoors.
And then that plant will toughen up and we'll feel like we have more of a green thumb because we'll have been able to care for that plant better.
The plants then get one more inspection. One worker places plants on the belt, another inspects the quality, removing any dead leaves. If they notice any wilting, the plants will be removed, and Costa will try and revive them. But on average, another 10% of plants perish during production in the US. Costa trucks its plants to retailers all over North America. Some are sold online. But the shrinkage continues in the store. It's estimated about 10% of plants don't make it out.
The big box stores, they don't tend to have horticulturists on staff. They just have people that may or may not water things.
I don't know about you, but I've gone to many big box stores and those plants are in sad condition.
Think wilted or yellowing leaves or rotted roots.
We go and we look at the tomatoes and the bananas and everything. We look for bruises. Is it really ripe enough? And so we need to look at plants even more that way.
But the biggest plant murderers are consumers.
You haven't grown a plant unless you killed it 3 times.
One survey found new gardeners kill 70% of their plants. Even experienced ones kill about 1/3 of what they grow.
That's where we make our money, but hey, let's not say that, right? So folks, when they get plants, they tend to love them so much, they may over care for them and they may not be so successful.
So out of 10 houseplants, only 3 will survive a significant amount of time in a customer's home. When everyone was stuck inside during the pandemic, more people turned to plants for their health benefits. And there's actually science to back that up. Researchers found that having plants in hospitals can speed up recovery time for patients, reduce their anxiety levels, and elevate their moods.
The presence of plants does things like decrease blood pressure, decrease heart rate, increase endorphins, all the things that make you feel better.
Plus, they're pretty. Exotic plants went viral on social media. Today on TikTok, there are over 4 billion views on videos with the hashtag #PlantTikTok. Social media influencers like Summer have made a living off sharing their collections and plant care tips.
You can make something look really good with photography and with lighting, and people all of a sudden may feel the need to have that plant.
And it's driving sales at just unprecedented levels.
And that's driven up prices.
We saw some people reselling the plants on social media for like $1,500 each.
The demand has put a squeeze on producers like Costa.
How has Costa Farms kept up with it?
We haven't.
We have also grown our portfolio to include different varieties of plants.
But starting a new line of plants, like this Aglaonema, could take up to 8 years. And trends change fast. Through the hardening process, pest control, and quality checks, growers like Costa are working to minimize shrinkage. Costa says its shrinkage is half the national average. But as consumers buy more, there's a lot of waste, from the lost plants to the growing number of plastic pots, peat, water, and space across the supply chain.
You wouldn't typically think that houseplants is an extractive industry, but in many cases, it actually is an extractive industry.
But there are ways consumers and producers can be more green. Consumers can get clippings from friends and learn how to take care of the plants they've already purchased.
And we understand how our pets function. We have to do the same with the plants. We have to figure out what exactly it is that they need. So we learn not to overwater plants. Most of the time, you don't need a lot of fertilizer.
Linda would like to see all growers swap peat moss for renewable potting mixtures, like the coconut coir Costa uses.
They can always compost the plants and recycle the pots.
But if consumers are having a hard time keeping plants alive, they should ask one simple question.
Do you really need that plant?
In 2022, America's luxury watch market was valued at $4 billion. But the demand is so high and supply is so low that the market for used watches is exploding.
This section of 47th Street is home to over 2,600 businesses selling gems, jewelry, and luxury watches. John buys and sells roughly a dozen watches per week here, from stores and other collectors. Today, he's visiting two of his regular spots.
Little Eddie's got a Patek that I need. Hopefully I could buy it from him, and I'm gonna show him a couple of pieces that I've got.
I gotta find it first.
Oh, that's good.
What's good about this watch, it comes fully complete. Look at the condition.
You got everything?
Yeah.
John already has a customer lined up for this rare Patek Philippe.
I really like this watch for
What's
myself.
the date on the papers? I'm curious. Not that it matters.
He's hoping to get it for under $40,000.
Listen, I know it's a nice watch. I'm not here to beat you up. You know I need it. 36,000? I thought I was pretty good at 35.
37,000, that's my final price. I think it's fair. You can think about it.
I don't have to think. Mazal.
No problem.
You're the man. Thank you. This watch will be sold for 40,000 and change. So I'll make $3,000 on the watch, which is not bad.
Down the street, John has his eye on a gold Rolex day-date with diamonds on the bezel, or the ring surrounding its glass.
How much is this $21,000 watch?
25,000. Yes.
2, 3, 5. You like that, right? Let's do it. It's factory diamond dial, factory diamond bezel.
23.5. The deal, but I'm gonna do for you. I'm gonna obviously say yes, but.
Really? It's beautiful.
John typically has around 30 watches in his collection, and most already have buyers lined up.
We like cash flow. I write a check, I want to know that, I'm going to have that money back, I'll make my profit on it, and move on to the next one. It's like the holy grail over here. I didn't even think they were still producing them.
He doesn't want to risk getting stuck with something he might not sell, even if he loves it, like this diamond-studded Rolex from Qatar, which has an asking price of $175,000.
When you look at these that they make on the street and you compare it to something like this, I mean, it's a different world. I don't have a home for it.
Despite the high price tags, John says he rarely makes more than a few $1,000s per watch. Sometimes it's only a few hundred.
There are very few home runs in this game. I mean, I don't know what is considered a home run. Making 10 grand on a watch, it's like that doesn't happen. Thank you, Yasha Mazal. And thank you. Thank you so much.
In fact, he makes even more money selling obscure parts than the actual watches.
These are interesting. These are called color change or tropical. And years ago, guys would never keep this stuff. But now, because they're unique, they keep them and they ask for a lot of money for them. These are Daytona dials, which are actually pretty cool. This is just tons of stuff, wallets, Rolex, duffel bags and hats. We have it all. We do.
He's hoarded these Rolex parts in his workshop for 25 years.
We're here in the lab. This is where I get to practice my guerrilla watchmaking skills. You have to have a very specific part for a very specific watch in order for it to command a very high price.
John has seen demand for Rolex parts and watches skyrocket after 2017. That's when a Rolex Daytona worn by the actor Paul Newman broke a record, selling for $15.5 million plus fees.
Selling officially at $15,500,000. Thank you for your patience, Natalie. It is history now. $15,500,000.
What happened after that was this big bull run, and I hate to use stock terminology, but that's what it was. It's like everybody started buying watches.
In 2021, Rolex retail sales were estimated to be higher than the next 5 brands combined. So why are they in such high demand? First off, their reputation for quality. They're made by hand with materials like 18-karat gold, platinum, and stainless steel. And there aren't many new ones entering the market. Brands like Patek Philippe and Audemars Piguet each make fewer than 100,000 watches per year. Rolex makes an estimated 1 million annually. And that's still not enough to keep up with demand.
For most people, the only way to get one is to get one secondhand. The result of that, in many cases, is higher demand than available supply, which causes prices to go up.
Rolexes also last and can resist all kinds of extreme conditions. In fact, it started off as a sports brand back in the early 20th century.
They began making highly functional timepieces designed to go underwater, top of mountains, and on jet planes. And these were professional grade timepieces for people that needed accurate measurement.
These were not collectible watches back in the day, okay? You look at some of these, watches that are 6- and 7-figure watches, they sold for maybe $100 at a military PX or something like that.
Edmund Hillary, one of the first to summit Everest, wore a Rolex Oyster Perpetual during his expedition in 1953. In the 60s, Rolex began sponsoring tennis matches, auto races, and a number of high-end luxury events. Rolexes also started showing up a lot more on movie screens. Actor Sean Connery wore one as James Bond. Marlon Brando wore one too. By the 1980s, Rolexes were sought-after collectibles. Today, a Rolex Daytona model is so popular, it's almost impossible to get on a waiting list.
I'm still on a waiting list since 1996, just to give you an idea.
But buyers are willing to spend a lot to skip the line, which is why used Rolexes can sell for 2 to 3 times their retail cost. And as demand soars, watch dealers like John have to be even warier of the biggest trap of the trade: counterfeits. Customs Officer Steve Nethersall showed us how they sniff out and seize counterfeit watches at JFK Airport. Before a package ever lands in the US, CBP gathers intelligence on the sender, container, and aircraft. He'll start by looking at the box.
Well, I'm looking because I don't have my glasses on, so I'm cheating. The first, when it comes in, is the country of origin. Louis Vuitton, they're coming from France. The watch is coming from Switzerland. When it's coming from China, bing, that's your #1 red flag. Rolex would never put their watches in little Ziploc bags. They don't put these inside it, the silica gel. Rolex does not send to individuals in the United States. They only send to their retail stores. More than 90% of all the goods that we receive that are counterfeit are from China. You know, sometimes by the naked eye you can't tell, but sometimes it's that bad you can. But you look and you can see the scratches and how it's not machined properly to a nice finish.
So when Steve finds a counterfeit good, he seizes it. Then he figures out the item's MSRP, using the brand's website and CBP's internal database.
This one here would be about $11,000. That's the MSRP. What the manufacturer would be losing had this been genuine. These are generally on the internet for about $200.
Back in his workshop, John is figuring out whether this Rolex is counterfeit. After 25 years in the industry, he usually knows what to look for.
I mean, I'm looking at the color of the case. This piece is not the same color as this piece. This is 18 karat gold. We always have to check, because I can't take a chance on paying for it, #1, or selling it to someone else if I'm not sure.
One of the most reliable ways to test gold Rolex parts is a scratch test on a black stone made of quartz. Then he adds a few drops of nitric acid, which dissolves any material that isn't gold.
And there you go. Wow. The acid did not dissolve the gold. Over here, the acid dissolved the gold. It is not authentic.
But most of the time, he can spot a fake with the naked eye.
We could usually spot these just based on the symmetry of the case. They don't have that nice Rolex slope. The other, obvious thing that you look at, if you look at the amount of space between the face and the glass, you will see that it is very high. It's probably got an extra 1.5 millimeters.
John also has his son James help with fraud detection.
And I scroll through hundreds of listings and I pick out the 10 that are fake.
The threat of counterfeits hasn't stopped sellers or buyers, though. Rolex is also getting in on the secondhand market, launching its own program to sell pre-owned Rolexes. Younger generations are fueling this new demand surge, and they're finding out about these old watches on TikTok.
I saw this watch. It's a 36mm white gold with a factory diamond dial. Can you pull it out for me?
John's son and his friend Tyler McCorsky have helped him build a huge social media following.
Buckley's with us today. Let's get it. The bread and butter is the negotiations. People like to see them, so we want to give people what they want. But our other thing that we really do well is more so education content.
Today, we're going to show you how to change the battery on quartz watch.
John teaches audiences the same lessons on TikTok he showed Tyler when he was still a kid.
The first time I ever sold a watch for Buckley, I was 8 years old. and it was a rubber swatch. Remember those? The rubber swatch watches. And he says, I need $5 on each one. Go sell them wherever, school, wherever, and keep whatever's left after the 5. As far as the whole hustle and the whole grind,
I got that Wimbledon for you if you want it.
I actually enjoy the going out there and trying to make money aspect of this business.
15-2. Thank you.
Despite all these new players, John isn't worried about the competition.
You go by these guys who fancy themselves, watch specialists, and they've been doing this for a year or two. Everybody's a specialist or an expert, okay? Listen, I'm a friggin' expert. I've been dealing with this stuff hand to hand. I've got the junk to prove it. McCorsky really left a cup of coffee down here? Did he really do that? That's just rude.
Americans spend almost $200 billion on car repairs annually. Last year, Hendrick Automotive Group and its various locations serviced 2.5 million cars.
If your car is on the frame machine, more than likely it's got some kind of structural damage. When you are getting ready to set up a car on the frame machine is obviously drive it up on the machine, make sure that the vehicle is square. The second part is you're going to go to the computer to figure out where your mounting clamps need to go on the vehicle. We have access to All Data, which is a computer system that gathers all the information from manufacturers to be able to repair vehicles correctly. You go ahead and get the car built onto the clamps. Then you go to the measuring system, and the measuring system will tell you where the damage is. We have to digitally measure the structure of the vehicle to ensure that all the components are where they need to be within millimeters. And then you have to reverse the damage. When you're operating, you have to be mindful of your surroundings. Obviously, make sure that you're in a safe spot and make sure that everybody around you is safe. You have to be very mindful in observing the damage and how it's being pulled out. The measuring system is connected to the computer, and you can see numbers that will move as you are pulling. And you want to get those numbers as close as possible to 0. The frame machine can be very intimidating. A lot of times the clamps will come off and kind of fly around, so you have to conquer that fear. Not all dents require such a large machine. For smaller and more delicate dents, we use the flat liner. The first step is to make sure that you've recognized your damage. For that, we have a special light that we set up so that you can actually see all the damage on the panel. Make sure that you sand the area that's getting ready to be pulled. Make sure that you get a good ground, a solid ground, before you start to put the pulling keys on the metal. Not every dent is a straight line. Sometimes dents they have a curve. After you've welded your keys onto the spot, then you begin your pulling process. You pick the correct bridge that you're going to use. When operating a bridge, it has a handle that has threads. And as you turn the thread, the handle gets shorter. And that's attached to the bridge and the rod. The rod will pull the dent out. If you have a dent that's deeper, you're gonna have to pull a little bit more. If you have a dent that's not quite as deep, you're gonna have to turn the knob a little bit less. Then you need to tap the crowns of the dent. Anytime you have a dent, it creates crowns. The dent doesn't always necessarily pull out. Sometimes you need to reassess after your pull, and you have to maybe pull in a different spot until you've gotten the dent as close as possible to its original position. After we use the flat liner, we still need to smooth out the dent, and that's where the Bondo process begins. Bondo can be a fast-drying filler that is sandable that we use to get the car's body as close as we can to its original shape. Once you've mixed your Bondo on your mixing board, we have plastic spreaders, and that is what you use to apply onto the dent. You have to make sure that you are applying it in the correct spots, that you're not applying it too much in spots that is not needed. You have to make sure that you are very fluid with it and that you are keeping the correct contours of the vehicle. Once you've applied Bondo and you've sanded it and you're happy with the way that the dent feels and it's visually correct, at that point you would take the car over to the paint shop for it to be primed. One of the first steps of painting is to make sure that you clean off any contaminants that are on the panel. The full replaced part or repaired part is painted. Adjacent panels are also blended in order to ensure a perfect color match. So the painting process is different for each vehicle because each repair size is different, but in a perfect world, beginning to end, it would be reasonable to say it would take around 2 hours. I would say it's very gratifying to fix cars. If somebody is in your collision center, it's because they had an accident, and accidents aren't fun for anybody. So it is gratifying when the customer picks up their car and they leave and they're happy, and you know that you had a part in making this person's problem disappear.
In 2023, Americans spent $8.3 billion on smartphone repairs. Abdullah Kabani runs a company that specializes in fixing broken iPhones.
My name's Abdullah. I am a phone repair store owner. Today I'll be showing you the repairs of 3 different iPhones in 3 different conditions. They all have a similar issue, a cracked back glass. The repairs are pretty similar, but each model has a few different steps. So this iPhone XS definitely has seen better days. Those chunks missing on the top and bottom, those look a little scary. Water could get in there, debris could get in there and damage things, but thankfully everything's still working all right. The first thing we'll do for this iPhone XS, we'll put it in the laser machine and we'll burn off the glue that holds the glass onto the frame. iPhones come straight from the Apple factory with adhesive that holds the back glass down to the frame, and it's my laser machine's job to vaporize the glue that's holding down the glass to that frame. The laser burns at a very high temperature, enough to go through the glass, completely obliterate the color standing in its way, and melts the glue straight off the frame. So my laser machine has a specific schematic for each iPhone model. It's designed down to a microscopic level to avoid any gaps in the frame and strictly go over the metal. Once all that adhesive is vaporized, we'll take it out of the laser machine and we'll go over to our workbench and start cracking away this glass. When breaking off the back glass, we have to be super careful not to let the blade puncture through the phone and damage an internal component. I use a series of tools to remove the back glass. It depends on the damage. If an iPhone has big chunks missing on the back glass and it has easy access to get underneath that glass, I'll just go ahead with a blade similar to a scalpel, and I'll go in there and I'll just pry off that glass. As you can see, the middle of the phone still has color in the glass. Apple started using glass backs starting with the iPhone 8 because of the wireless charging coil. That's the first model to have the wireless charging coil. The reason why it needs a back glass is so that there isn't a piece of metal that's affecting the electricity going through and charging the phone. The schematic in the laser machine specifically omits the area over the wireless charging coil. During the second laser run, right here you'll see we're vaporizing the residual glue left over after removing the glass. Once the second laser round is done, we'll take it back over to our workstation and we'll brush off the rest of that glue. I use a metal brush that gets in and scrubs that adhesive right off of there. You have to have a surgeon's precision, because if you go in and get those metal brush teeth into a gap, you could damage a component. Now that I've removed all the glass, I can finally start putting the phone all the way back together. When I'm re-adhering the back glass to the frame, I use industrial strength glue. It's called B7000. Straight from the Apple factory, they use cold press glue. We try not to get too close to the edges, that way we don't have a lot of seepage. After the repair is done, if there's any extra glue, we'll go ahead and clean it up with some glue remover. Moving on to the iPhone 8, as you can see, this one, it's cracked, but it's definitely not as bad as the XS. It just has hairline cracks all over the place, but thankfully it's not missing any chunks, so it looks like the inside components should be fine. So this back glass comes off almost exactly like how the iPhone XS did. The only difference is, with it being the first iPhone that Apple used a back glass on, they actually made the glue a lot stronger for some reason. So this repair, I tend to go a little bit slower when I'm breaking off the glass, and it tends to fling a lot farther just because it's on there harder. One key difference with the iPhone 8 back glass restoration is that we have to be careful around the flash module. As you can see there, there's a big hole to the right of the camera lens, and unlike the iPhone XS where the flash is embedded within the camera lens, this one is actually placed off to the right and it's exposed. Since the laser machine avoids the wireless charging coil, the adhesive that holds the glass above it is actually still there. So we have to slow down and use a heat gun and loosen up that adhesive. Right here we have the iPhone 12 Pro Max. This gold tends to hide the cracks a little bit, but you can see them. While fixing this 12 Pro Max, we'll follow the same basic steps with any back glass repair. The key differences are the raised glass in between the camera lenses and being careful when we're going around the MagSafe components. As you can see, the glass is a little bit thicker around the camera lenses. Starting with the iPhone 11, Apple started producing back glass with glass that's about twice as thick around the camera lens. We do face an issue when we're going to break that glass. Since it's thicker, it is harder to get out of there. To get it out, we actually have to fragment it, and to do that, we have punch tools. This is similar to something that firefighters use to break a windshield. Thankfully, this punch tool is specifically designed so that it only breaks it on a surface level and doesn't create enough pressure to damage any internal components. With the iPhone 12 Pro Max, we face a new issue, and that's the MagSafe. There are strips of magnets that go around the wireless charging coil, and those can be ripped off along with the glass when you're pulling it off, so you have to be very careful that we don't rip the wire connected to those magnetic sections. Although it might seem like a nightmare of a process, I find it really fun. And it's also very fun to see the before and afters, and that's one of the main reasons why I do what I do. Just to see the transformation of bringing things back to life.
Baked goods were an $82 billion industry in the US in 2022. Orwasher's Bakery in New York has made more than 10 million loaves of bread since it opened over a century ago.
Orwasher's Bakery was founded in 1916 by Abraham Orwasher, a Hungarian immigrant determined to bring quality Eastern European breads to his local community. Since being sold to its current owner in 2008, the business has expanded to 2 brick-and-mortar locations, plus a massive wholesale production facility, which makes bread for some of the biggest restaurants in NYC.
All right, so today we're in the Bronx at Orwasher's giant factory. This is where they make the bread that's getting sent out to some of the biggest restaurants and supermarkets in the city, and we're gonna go get a behind-the-scenes tour to see how it's all done. that's a really good look on everyone.
I really like it. It reminds me of Lunch Lady.
Exactly. That's what you're giving me right now.
Yes.
Have a look.
Great.
Ta-da! Pose. Pose. You ready?
Yep.
The factory is split into 3 separate areas for mixing, shaping, and baking.
So right now you have the water, starter, and flour, and it's being incorporated. And we're shortly going to add the yeast and then the salt to it. This could make a lot of bread, a lot of dough.
How many loaves do you think you'll get out of something this size?
Well, I mean, right now we're mixing a couple 100 pounds, so you could essentially get probably 150 loaves.
A lot of dough.
Once the dough is mixed, it makes its way into the shaping room. Bakers and machines work together to shape 40 different types of dough daily, which will produce over 150 different types of bread products overall. They make everything from the classics like ciabatta and sourdough to more original options like the nutrient-filled raisin and sunflower seed spelt. Before the shaped dough is ready for the oven, it makes a pit stop to the humidity-controlled proofing room.
Here you go.
Whoa! Oh, it's like a sauna in here.
Well, not quite. I mean,
I feel like this is good for my pores, though.
After proofing and fermenting for various amounts of time depending on the type of dough, everything eventually makes its final destination into the oven room.
Right, so you have your deck oven and your 3 convection ovens or rack ovens, and this is where all the bread is baked, and then we move it a little bit over to cool it.
The freshly baked bread is then shipped out first thing in the morning, 7 days a week. Well, all except one.
How about this guy right here?
Perfect.
Is this mine? I can take him home with me?
It's all yours.
Fresh out of the oven baked bread just for me? Oh my God, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Keith, this was excellent.
Thank
I
you
really
very much.
appreciate you taking us behind the scenes. We had a
You're
lot of
welcome.
fun.
Florida's orange industry generates over $3 billion in annual sales. But as more and more trees are infected by a deadly disease, growers are fighting to keep the business alive.
Larry's a 5th-generation farmer in Fort Meade, Florida.
We've been growing citrus in my family since the 1850s. When I first started in the industry, citrus occupied over 900,000 acres in the state of Florida. In fact, some years we had too much fruit and market prices were depressed.
Just 15 years ago, his family packed 1 million orange cartons a year, mostly Valencia oranges, the big, sweet, juicy kind.
You planted a grove expecting that to last for multiple generations.
The first case of citrus greening was reported in China back in 1919. It quickly spread across the continent, devastating citrus groves in India and Saudi Arabia as well. No one knows exactly how the Asian citrus psyllid made it to Florida, but in 1998, it showed up on an orange jasmine plant in a backyard in Palm Beach County. And it quickly spread throughout the state on infected rootstocks. But it would take another 7 years before Florida's orange trees showed signs of greening.
It spreads throughout the state before you even know it's present.
And in 2005, Larry found his first infected tree.
It was a real challenge and an eye-opening for us. We knew what a threat it could be to our operation, and we were fearful there were more infected trees that just had not been detected.
At first, Larry tried removing all the sick trees, but the insect moved faster, soon infecting too many to control. When a psyllid munches on a citrus tree, it leaves behind the bacteria that causes greening, here in the vascular tissue. The bacteria replicates and blocks this important highway for removing nutrients. Underground, the root systems thin and die out. Above ground,
You notice the yellow pattern, the dark green spots,
If you can see me through the canopy of this tree, that means this tree is really, really sick.
While the trees do keep bearing oranges for a few years, the fruit essentially never ripens.
You see it's small in size, it remains green, and when I cut this fruit, you see an odd shape.
You can still eat the fruit, it's just not as sweet.
The orange juice from this fruit has lower sugar content or bricks than normal fruit, but there's nothing wrong with the juice. But it's awful.
And 40% of those oranges fall off the tree sooner than usual.
The bacteria is actually starving and kills the tree over time.
Today, researchers estimate 90% of all orange trees in the state have the bacteria.
No longer do you see citrus trees abundant in the landscape.
Larry has kept his trees alive and producing for 15 years, using a combination of horticultural techniques developed by scientists at the University of Florida.
Some of our work that is going on right now is finding ways to keep those trees that do have the disease still producing fruit that are usable.
You guys want to see what some psyllids look like? Yes. All right. So they're very small. Ooh, there's an escapee actually. They're small, they kind of jump around a little bit. So we use this thing called an aspirator, or the more fun term we use with children is pooter. We just suck them up. It's basically a little vacuum in my hand.
Here, Lauren Diepenbrock can study the psyllids' movement to learn what might keep them off a citrus tree.
Using the aspirator is actually a really efficient way to collect psyllids.
She's figured out a few things that detract psyllids. First, this pink clay. It's sprayed on the trees to hide the leaves from the insect, which uses light wavelengths to see. One study showed the clay was more effective than insecticides. The second thing Lauren is researching is these 8-foot wide sheets of plastic, called reflective mulch.
The idea is that it should make it where the psyllid can't find the host plant. It could be that it blinds them or causes a visual deterrent.
Has it worked?
Somewhat. We do get psyllids. We do get them, but we do get them at a reduced rate.
A few years ago, farmers discovered that putting plastic bags around baby trees could help them grow stronger before infection. Lauren's now studying how effective these individual protective covers, or IPCs, actually can be.
So this is IPC mesh, and as you can see, there's little holes in it. You can see my hand very clearly. Wind, sun, rain, it all gets through here. The goal is to really keep that Asian citrus psyllid off the tree. And then if you look underneath, this is our irrigation.
The baby trees will grow in the IPCs for 2 years.
So you can see that the trees aren't perfect. We're still gonna have some stuff on them. We do have some pest issues in here, but they look really good compared to what's in the open field. And this will actually give our trees a fighting chance once they're out in the environment, and they could potentially get infected with sea lice.
Scientist Tripti Vashish thinks the key is in the soil.
We have been learning that the trees need these nutrients to fight infection. The citrus trees, because of this disease, have very small roots or fewer roots, so they are not very efficient in picking up the nutrients. It's like a job of 10 people needs to be done by one person, same with the roots.
She figured out that giving smaller doses of fertilizer and water more frequently helps the sick roots absorb nutrients better.
And it's similar like us, 6 small meals each day rather than 3 big meals are better. Same is with the fertilizer and irrigation. Smaller doses are better than big doses.
Larry uses fertilizer custom designed for his trees. He's also planting more young ones.
One of our strategies for dealing with greening is to plant the groves at higher densities. We're planting 300 trees per acre compared to 140 to 150 trees per acre before we were dealing with the disease.
So if he knows all the trees will get infected, with more planted, hopefully some will survive. Growers have also tried releasing predator wasps and spraying insecticides. While there's no silver bullet, in combination, these short-term solutions have sort of worked.
You can slow down the decline.
We've been battling citrus greening for 15 years, and while the industry's not thriving, we're definitely surviving.
But the problem is, all these approaches tack on an extra $600 per acre onto production costs for growers.
Our revenues are down by more than half on an individual grove basis.
Growers are losing money.
And many couldn't swallow the losses. By early 2022, half of Florida's orange growers had left the industry. So while he waits for a long-term solution, Larry's taking the hit so he can keep harvesting the same way his family always has. Workers quickly pick the oranges and drop them into bags. Once they've got a good batch, pickers dump them into baskets in the grove. Workers then truck the oranges to the packing facility just down the road.
We have 8 digital cameras that takes a picture of each piece of fruit as it travels through the packing line. We use an electronic sorter to divide the crop by color.
If they're orange enough, the fruit gets cleaned and hit with a layer of natural wax.
It preserves the fruit, it extends its shelf life.
Today, because of HLB, Larry packs half as many boxes as he did 17 years ago. If the oranges are a bit too green, Larry knows they'll be hard to sell on the fresh side. So he sends them to get juiced at the Florida's Natural Plant in Lake Wales. Larry owns the juicing plant along with other local growers as part of the company's cooperative.
About 90% of the fruit grown in the state goes to orange juice.
But just like growers, the factory has been getting fewer oranges.
So less efficiency in the plant.
With a lower fruit volume, the factory had to shut down one of its 3 processing lines. Nowadays, 60,000 boxes of oranges arrive at the plant from cooperative farms across Central Florida. That's about 30,000 fewer than before HLB.
Within 24 hours of harvesting, we juice the fruit.
This machine squeezes the juice out of every orange.
We pull out any seeds, and we also collect the pulp where we can add that back to whatever degree we want to do that.
The juice gets pasteurized and then pumped into cartons. But remember, greening affects oranges' natural sugar content. So Florida's Natural has to blend infected oranges with sweeter ones from different regions or even seasons. It still tastes like orange juice, it's just not quite as sweet. Today the factory pumps out about a third less than pre-greening.
They need a home for their fruit where they can get maximum value, that hopefully can sustain their operations until a solution to greening is found.
Many scientists believe the long-term solution lies with re-engineering nature, either genetically changing the bug itself or naturally breeding citrus trees.
Ultimately, a tree that's resistant or tolerant to the disease will be key.
That's the project Fred Gamitter and his team are working on at the University of Florida. They're trying to breed for an HLB-resistant orange variety, meaning even if the disease shows up, the tree won't get sick. To do that, he takes 2 different types of trees, maybe one with yummy oranges, and one that's resistant, and essentially has them mate. And their kid will hopefully still taste good, but won't get HLB.
That's really the holy grail of citrus greening research.
But that's not easy. Finding a resistant orange is like looking for a genetic needle in a haystack.
It's extremely difficult to breed new oranges.
We know of some kinds of trees related to oranges that are resistant, and we're trying to access the genetics of those resistant types by making crosses.
Fred says it could take more than a decade.
So it's long term. There's always an element of serendipity in this.
But armed with that miracle-resistant tree, they could be better prepared to tackle future diseases.
It's a global, interconnected world we live in. People and plant diseases move about pretty freely, and so there will be another problem, another disease come along.
I believe science will continue to deliver new tools that will make growing citrus easier over time. I look forward to those days. I'm sure we'll have other challenges that we'll face in time, but today citrus greening is here to stay.
Americans spend around $1 billion on real Christmas trees each year. The most famous one, the Rockefeller Center tree, requires a team of dozens of workers, huge cranes, and a 115-foot trailer to set up.
The iconic Rockefeller tree didn't come from a Christmas tree farm. It came from someone's backyard, here in Oneonta, New York. This year's tree is an 80-year-old Norway spruce, found in Al Dick's yard.
Tree's 75 feet tall, 45 feet wide, and about 11 tons. I found this tree back in 2016.
The head gardener for Rockefeller Center happened to be riding down the road and he saw the tree.
Eric stopped by Al's general store to see if Al and his family would donate their tree to Rockefeller Center.
He asked me if we could do it, and we said sure, but they had to wait a few years.
It wasn't tall enough when they first saw it.
It wasn't tall enough, they had to grow it.
I've been looking at it for a couple years. I watered it, I fed it over a couple years, and then this summer when I came by, it just looked great and it looked perfect, and it was the year to take it.
When the spruce was unveiled as the 2020 tree, the Rockefeller team got to work protecting and preparing it.
We had a 24-hour-a-day guards.
Eric especially, he's been here every day. There's been like family, we're gonna miss them being outside every day.
But getting this massive spruce to the center of Manhattan is no easy task. First, it had to come out of the ground.
We came up and we started tying it. It took us all the way to Saturday afternoon.
Eric hired a crew of local workers to tie up the branches. That's to make sure they're secure through the cutting and the drive.
And then the crane came and we built the crane and put the counterweights on it so that it could hold the tree.
The crane is already attached to the tree when the workers begin cutting. Eric and his team have private property and bystanders to think about. It takes only a few minutes to saw through the massive trunk, leaving the giant tree hanging in the air.
Now we moved it over to the truck.
The tree is laid on its side on that 115-foot-long trailer and strapped into place.
The tree is going to take a nice little trip down to New York City.
Often the most complicated part is getting it right from the property where it is onto the highway.
What is normally a 3.5-hour drive takes up to 3 days with a 75-foot tree.
You don't want to get the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree stuck in traffic. And then of course the city of New York is always tremendously helpful with us in terms of closing the streets and making sure that we're able to have a smooth arrival into the city.
Normally, the tree arrives to big crowds, but this year, because of COVID-19, it pulled up to an empty Rockefeller Center.
We like to think that Tree Arrival Day is the start of the holiday season officially in New York. And certainly this has been a year unlike any other, so it felt all the more important to us to continue those traditions.
Carefully, it's lifted off the truck, then tilted right side up and slid into the sturdy tree stand in the middle of Rockefeller Center.
As if putting up the tree in Rockefeller Plaza is not enough.
Crews working on the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree got a little surprised.
They found a tiny owl.
This year, workers found a little owl hidden inside the tree, and the bird went viral as people guessed it hitched a ride all the way from upstate New York. He was brought safely to a shelter and named appropriately Rockefeller, Rocky for short. Also blowing up the internet, the fact that the tree looked a little bare on arrival. But what might look like a scrawny tree now got a big facelift.
This is the extension to make it nice and full.
Over the next couple of weeks, the tree was surrounded in scaffolding. As the tree's branches settled and fluffed out, it's been reported workers also attached branch extensions to make the tree appear fuller.
We stick a hole in the tree, put the branch back in,
boom,
wire it in, boom.
Like a weave. Like a weave.
Like a weave. It's just like a weave.
Then they draped 50,000 LED lights around it and topped it with a 900-pound Swarovski crystal star. And finally, on December 2nd, the Rockefeller Christmas tree is lit up, this year through a virtual ceremony.
The tree is always real. Come, you can smell it, you can see it. This year we probably won't let you touch it thanks to COVID, but I can assure you it is a very real tree. We have the pine cones to prove it.
And when it's all over,
we take the lumber when it is done and we donate to Habitat for Humanity, and it turns into homes for the future.
Americans spend billions a year on Thanksgiving turkeys. Gunther Farms in Indiana has been raising turkeys for generations that are sold each November.
Greg's family has been raising animals this way for 4 generations.
Yeah, they get rained on. Occasionally they even get snowed on, but they get to live the life of a turkey.
They're raised on grain that's not genetically modified, and Greg never gives them antibiotics.
The typical turkey is raised in a barn with several other thousand turkeys. Ours, get to go out, scratch in the ground, chase after some bugs, get to actually see the sun, breathe fresh air their whole life.
Catching this many birds the week before Thanksgiving takes teamwork and patience.
Turkeys start out as a not very intelligent bird, but they got a lot going on when they get to this age. They got a personality.
The next stop is the processing plant, where they'll spend the night. But we'll catch up with them later, after Greg gives us a tour of the farm.
The animals that we consume ought to eat their green leafy vegetables. They ought to get some exercise and they ought to get some sunlight. There's a handful of other farms that are raising pastured turkeys, but it's a really, really small percentage of the marketplace.
All kinds of farms in America have been decreasing for decades. At the same time, the farms that have survived have gotten bigger and bigger. Greg's turkeys cost up to 3 times as much as mass-produced turkeys in the supermarket. The intensive work it takes to raise his birds means they'll sell for up to $6 a pound.
Our biggest cost is that we just have more labor in taking care of birds.
Let's get back to those turkeys we left at the processing plant. It takes about 10 people working 3 long days to kill and package all of these birds in time for Thanksgiving. Workers hang the birds upside down by their feet and make sure the turkeys won't feel what comes next.
We stun our turkeys with electricity. I think it's a really good and humane way to slaughter turkeys at a small scale.
Greg's processing plant is audited and certified annually to prove his poultry is humanely raised and slaughtered. Next, Greg tosses the dead turkeys into the plucker, a machine that spins the birds to remove their feathers. Then, workers remove their organs. At the end of the line, Greg's son Evan dumps them into ice baths.
We want them to chill as rapid as possible. These all have to last all the way into Thanksgiving. So the quicker that we can get them to chill, the better the shelf life is going to be on them.
But keeping the business going just keeps getting tougher. Over the past few years, turkey has grown to be about 15% of Greg's business. That's because for the first time in 2 decades, the farm is missing what used to be its biggest seller.
This was our pasture chicken operation last year. It was about 250 chickens in each one of those. We'd have 20 to 30,000 chickens on the farm at any time and would process about 3,000 of them a week.
These now empty fields used to bring in half of the farm's revenue. But in 2020, Greg abandoned his chicken business.
An awful lot of our business was focused on raising pastured chicken for 20 years. It was probably the most difficult business decision that I've ever made.
His chickens cost nearly twice as much as the cheap poultry that American consumers have come to expect. Wholesale buyers picked cheaper, mass-produced chickens over his.
I'm extremely worried that the turkeys is going to go the same route as chicken.
Last Thanksgiving, Greg lost a longtime retail turkey buyer. He says the order was canceled at the last minute.
If you lose a big wholesale buyer, it can be devastating on a business like ours.
Greg had to put hundreds of unsold Thanksgiving turkeys in the freezer. He later cut them up to sell as parts instead, but it wasn't as profitable.
We get dropped on a regular basis by wholesalers, and it's almost exclusively overpriced. In some cases, we're able to differentiate our birds, and in some cases, we're just not.
Greg should have an advantage with customers who care about where their meat comes from. But corporate marketers are doing their best to tap into those consumers, even if it's just about creative labeling. For example, these 3 turkeys look like they're from different brands, right? Well, Honeysuckle White, Shady Brook Farms, and Honest Turkey are all Cargill brands. That's a food conglomerate that is one of the 10 largest private companies in the world.
At the end of the day, there's really this illusion of choice in the grocery store. We see a lot of deceptive marketing claims being made by these big companies.
Advocacy groups filed a deceptive advertising complaint with the Federal Trade Commission against Cargill in 2020. Cargill told Insider it believes the claim lacks merit and that its turkey production is in line with USDA standards. The FTC said it can't disclose the status of the complaint. Cargill says their turkeys are raised by independent family farmers. This is how it works. Large companies like Cargill or Purdue Farms will often contract smaller farms to produce their chicken in Turkey. But some small farmers say they lost their independence once they were contracted with companies. Craig Watts was one of them. He raised chickens on contract for Purdue Farms for more than 20 years.
The company owns the birds, the company owns the feed.
He says Purdue controlled how many chickens he raised and how he raised them.
I definitely would have not had 30,000 birds crammed in a 20,000 square foot facility.
In 2012, Craig says he filmed Purdue employees on his farm throwing chicks to the ground and kicking birds. He ended his contract with Purdue in 2016.
They give you this image of Ma and Pa kettle and the pitchfork and the nice white picket fence and the red barn and the pretty white chicken, when in reality, the conditions that these animals are raised in are miserable.
In a statement to Insider, Purdue said it was not familiar with Craig's videos and that they don't reflect its current practices. The company also said it announced commitments to animal care, including focuses on farmer relationships and transparency. Purdue connected us with a current contract farmer, Stephen Brake.
We have a whole lot of control of what we do. We're not sitting here at the mercy of Purdue.
Stephen confirmed that Purdue owns the chickens he raises and manages their feed. Back at Gunthorpe Farms, Greg's turkeys are chilled and ready to be bagged. Despite all the extra costs, Greg doesn't want to give up his farming methods, even if it makes it harder for him to stay in the business. In a week, customers will pick up their turkeys from Greg in Chicago or directly from the farm in rural Indiana. And this time around, he plans to sell all of his turkeys.
It's very rewarding to know that we're raising turkeys for people that care about how their food's raised, how it's processed, and how it gets to them.
This is dancing the rice. It's a traditional technique to extract this ancient rice grain from its hull. It's just one of the many steps that members of the Ojibwe tribe perform to savour the grain. Known as manumin, meaning the good berry, this type of wild rice has been harvested by the tribe in the Great Lakes region of North America for centuries. A pound of it can sell for $24, 15 times as much as white rice. For the Ojibwe people, harvesting this rice means much more than money. It's a way to connect with their ancestors and pass on their traditions to future generations. But as the rest of the world discovers this ancient grain, the tribe fears that it will lose its importance and that it will be separated from its natural ecosystem. So, what is the meaning of manumin? And why is it so expensive?
We're heading over to one of our tribal lakes that's on the reservation. This lake is 100% owned by the tribe. People say you can't own the water, but this is a reservation lake.
While most wild rice on the market is cultivated in paddies to ripen all at the same time, manumin still follows the natural cycle of the rice plant. This difference has not gone unnoticed, and the grain's popularity has been growing for decades. But for the Ojibwe tribe, manumin is sacred. They continue to harvest it by hand, which is one reason it can sell for twice as much as cultivated wild rice.
See, everything has a life, has a spirit. So that's why we offer tobacco to whatever we're doing.
Lee Lin is the rice chief of the tribal band here at Mole Lake. It's here that manumin grows. Every fall, when the season begins, Leland heads out to the lake with his cousin Chad to harvest the rice.
Right now I'm push-pulling Chad. Chad's our picker, I'm the push-puller. We're looking for the rice right now. The puller's job is to look for the rice and put him on the rice so he can pick it.
Looking for the rice on top. You know, like right here you can see there's rice kernels on top, a couple of spots. And even if there's nothing there, I'll still grab it and pull it in. Something could fall off. The rice, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Every time you would say miigwech, miigwech.
To harvest the rice, Chad, the knocker, uses a set of wooden sticks to knock the rice directly off the plants into the canoe. As a knocker, Chad is following in the footsteps of his grandfather, who used to harvest manumin as well.
I made this set myself the year he passed. And then this set is the set that he made the year before he passed. Makes me feel good.
As he works, he thanks the plants for today's harvest.
Miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Saying thanks also dictates a rhythm for picking.
That's the best sound in the world.
Unlike cultivated rice, manumin doesn't all ripen at the same time. So Leland and Chad must set out in the canoe multiple times during the season.
It's small in your hand, but after a while of being out here, it adds up. I mean, we were only out here for an hour and about a quarter of our boat is covered.
But what's here on the boat's floor isn't the size of the final harvest. Within this, they'll often find unripe rice and hulls with no rice inside at all.
Green rice, when we're talking about green rice, it's actually green rice. And this black rice here is ripe. There's years where we get what we call a ghost rice. The ghost rice you'll have the hull of the rice and there'll be nothing in it, it'll be empty. Some stocks don't always grow.
When manoomin is sold, it usually sells for around $24 per pound. The price varies depending on the overall harvest, the stock, and the buyer's connections.
You know how people refer to oil as black gold? This is our black gold.
Now that Leland and Chad are back from the lake, it's time to dry the rice. Depending on how ripe it is, it may need to be soaked overnight.
See, this rice we didn't really have to get wet last night, just because it's already starting to ripen really good.
The whole community gets involved in the drying process. It's a great opportunity for young tribe members to learn from their elders. Air drying is the first step in separating the rice grain from the hulls. Removing the hulls further reduces the size of the overall harvest, but today's trip to the rice beds has been more successful than harvests in recent years.
This year we had some nice grains. It was long, it was fat. So this year your percentage of rice would be about 80-20. 80% of the grain you'll probably lose 20% with the hulls.
We're actually converting that rice from a medicine to a food. Whenever that wild rice has moisture or water in it, it still has a life.
Removing moisture is important for the following step: parching the rice on a wood fire. It's done in a metal pan with a wooden paddle.
This part is going to be the coolest part of the tub, and this is going to be the hottest part. So you're going to put this up on the fire, and you're going to actually see this actually turn brown as it starts parching.
If a grain retains too much moisture, it'll pop, just like popcorn. But the separation of the grains from their hulls is far from complete. To do that, Roger makes a shallow hole in the ground, pours in the rice, and covers it with deer hide. He then dons a pair of soft buckskin moccasins and threshes the rice by stepping on it. This step is called dancing the rice, and Roger takes it quite literally.
It looks like the twist, but it's the Anishinaabe two-step. I tell everyone, I said, this is how I got my wife of 47 years now.
The poles he uses are not for balance. He uses them to transfer his weight to avoid breaking the rice. Roger's two-step was successful. Once separated from the grains, the hulls are so lightweight, they fly away like dust. And that's exactly how they will be filtered out, by tossing the batch in the air from this birch bark basket. Nowadays, dancing and tossing the rice can also be done by a machine.
Yeah, you know, you got 2, 4, 6, 12 moccasins. 12 feet working at once instead of 2 feet working at once. As it rotates, it's taking the hulls off. You can see that there's long grain. There's some that's a little broken up. That little broken up stuff is good for soup rice.
Despite this faster method, the tribe places great importance on continuing to dance and toss the rice by hand.
There's elders that always told us to pay attention because someday you're going to be teaching this. You know, as a kid, I just kind of laughed about it and was like, Yeah, you know, I'm not gonna be that guy, but here I am teaching everybody what I know.
But while a good return is important, the tribe doesn't harvest to make a profit. Manoomin is only sold when needed.
You know, you can't just buy this on Amazon. I'm sure that there are certain individuals that will sell it on the internet. It's all about people who are around here who can make connections with somebody who does this. It's all about those relationships and how they can, what price they're willing to give for a pound of rice.
Manoomin contains 3 times more protein than white rice, more vitamin B than brown rice, and is rich in antioxidants. These values have made it an essential part of the Ojibwe diet for centuries, together with berries, fish, meat, vegetables, and maple sugar.
Well, yeah, there is many different ways to make rice. You can add wild rice to just about any kind of dish. I mean, we got berries with wild rice, walleye cheek chowder with wild rice.
Our rice doesn't even compare nutritionally to white rice, or even Uncle Ben doesn't even have anything over us.
Mole Lake is fully owned by the local Ojibwe tribe, which carefully controls the flow of water and monitors its minerals. No motorboats are allowed in the lake, and duck and goose hunting is prohibited during the rice picking season.
We don't allow lead shot to be used when we shoot the birds, because then that settles into the sediment. The plant will uptake that lead.
This is a ancient rice bed. I mean, we had rice that was carbon dated 800 years ago.
For Leland and Chad, harvesting Manoomin isn't about collecting every last grain of rice from the plants. Not all the rice falls into the canoe, and that's okay. The rice that falls back into the water will reseed the lake for the next season.
We believe that you take what you need, not what you want.
Over the last 200 years, the ecosystem that supports Manoomin has come increasingly under threat. The tribe was forced to cede lands to the federal government in 1837 and 1842, and even today regularly receives multi-million-dollar offers from different suitors to sell the lake.
As Manoomin becomes more popular, a lot of non-tribal people who haven't done this, they want to go out and try and do it for themselves. So one of the concerns is that they don't know how to do it, because they can actually destroy a rice bed by when they're picking. They hit it too hard. They're trying to get everything off of it.
Although the harvest was good this year, this isn't always the case.
There's been people that would come off the lake daily with 200 plus pounds. There are years where you come in with an average of 150 pounds. This year seems to be one of the best.
Over the past century, the hand-harvested Manoomin habitat has declined by a third. Water pollution, oil pipelines, fluctuating water levels, rising temperatures, and invasive fish species are all factors threatening the delicate ecosystem at Mole Lake and other lakes where Manoomin grows.
There are other lakes around here that do have rice, but then, you know, it's not as big of a grain as what we got, or, you know, it ain't as thick as what we have here on this rice lake. This is the reason we're here, is because of this rice. We fought over this rice to live here.
What Leland is referring to is the Battle of Mole Lake, a clash between native tribes that killed 500 people in 1806.
People were getting pushed from the east to the west, and Lakota happened to be some of them, Sioux happened to be some of them, we happened to be some of them, but our people just never left, and they weren't going to leave this area because this is where the spirits told us to stay.
It's essential that the lake has a constant supply of fresh water to avoid any sediment buildup, which would prevent nutrients from reaching the rice plants. As custodians of the lake, local harvesters do what they can to manage this natural resource.
this water isn't always at this level. The creek down here, we got a dam in the water that we build every year, and so we can bring the water up.
The same grain, but domesticated by farmers and grown in paddies, can now be found at a fraction of the cost and is often mislabeled as wild rice. But for the Ojibwe tribe, naturally grown manoomin has a value that can't be easily counted in dollars and cents.
What people know as wild rice is not what we call it. We call it manoomin, and it's the good seed or the good food. And people say that it's wild, but it was put here for a purpose for us.
In the tiny town of Cabot, Vermont, this creamery has been churning out dairy products for 100 years. Their claim to fame? The Vermont Cheddar. Cabot Creamery makes about 130 million pounds of the stuff each year, and it ends up on shelves across the U.S. Their extra sharp cheddar nabbed first place in the 2019 U.S. Championship Cheese Contest, while their mild and medium cheddars got first in the 2018 World Championship for Cheese. Yep, such a competition exists, and I want to be a judge. So how does Cabot Creamery make the world's tastiest cheddar cheese? Well, it all started here in Vermont, on a family farm. In 1919, 94 farmers in Cabot, hoping to better market their dairy products, formed a cooperative. This co-op meant the farmers not only owned the Cabot brand, but saw 100% of the profits. Fast forward a century, and the creamery still runs on this model. But today, more than 800 family farms across New England own Cabot. Farms just like this one. This is Fairmont in East Montpelier, Vermont.
My name's Clara, and I'm a third-generation dairy farmer here at Fairmont. My husband tells me that he's eaten more cheese since he's met me than he ever did in his life before.
As part of the Cabot Cooperative, Clara's family knows exactly where their milk is going, and even what products it'll become.
Our milk mostly becomes hard cheeses and butter.
Cabot deals with making, marketing, and selling the cheese, so the farmers can focus on what they do best, milking cows. Clara's family has almost 1,500 Holstein cows at their two farms, one here in East Montpelier and one in Craftsbury, Vermont.
We ship about 5 million gallons of milk a year.
Fairmont milks their cows using a milking machine, attached to the udders by a farmhand.
The cows are being really well cared for and loved by family farmers, and that's really special.
But some of Cabot's newest farm facilities are using robotic milkers to speed up the process. Once the milk is collected, it's held in tanks until a Cabot truck arrives. These trucks can come up to 3 times a day to load up the supply of fresh milk and transport it to the Cabot plant. Here it will become either butter, cottage cheese, sour cream, yogurt, or of course, cheese. Cheddar cheese. It takes Cabot about 10 gallons of milk to make just 1 pound of cheese. To make Cabot's signature cheddar, first the milk is pasteurized. The milk is then poured into a huge vat where a starter culture of bacteria and the special enzyme called rennet are added in. This combo jumpstarts the process of curdling the milk into cheese. And as the cheese is formed, big steel wires break it down into small curds and a liquid known as whey. Once the cheese curds are cooked through, the whey and the curds head to the finishing table. Here, the whey is drained out. Salt is added in to cut some of that acidity. This is also the point where Cabot can add in herbs and other ingredients to make their specialty flavors, like super spicy habanero and the cheese for us weaker heat seekers, the pepper jack. After that, everything's mixed together. Next, the cheese curds are squeezed together to form massive 40 or 60-pound blocks. Those blocks are then sent to the aging room, where they're left in a temperature-controlled space to mature. These folks are the cheese graters, the people responsible for making sure Cabot's cheese is aging up to their world's best standard.
On average in our inventory, we have close to 70 million pounds of cheese that we repeatedly will sample on an everyday basis. Some days we're evaluating up to 150 samples or vats a day.
When the cheese finally makes it to the aging room, the cheese graters take a plug or a sample out of each block.
Good flavor. It's a good Monterey Jack, a little salty.
And Monterey Jack is typically a short-aged cheese, so younger cheese. It's got moisture added to it, make a unique profile.
As the cheddar gets older, the flavors that develop become more intense. Yeah, every batch tastes a little bit different. 1,000 different farms, I mean, the mix is always going to be a little bit different. Cheese is a living organism.
Graders like Gina and Ted determine when a cheese block is ready to be cut. The blocks head back to the factory for the finishing touches. An industrial slicer breaks those puppies down to a more edible 8-ounce block. Then it's sealed in plastic and boxed up in crates.
Nearly 1 million pounds of coffee get processed in a typical season at Ka'u Coffee Mill on the island of Hawaii. But this warehouse is filled with nearly $1 million worth of Ka'u-grown coffee beans, and they aren't going anywhere.
By this time, on a normal year, that all would have been milled down and sold. But since the global demand completely shut down, I'm still hanging on to that.
Although Hawaii accounts for less than 1% of the global coffee production, on average, it brings in around $50 million a year. But this year,
By no more income, no more revenue, only expense. That's why I'm losing a lot.
This is going to be our breakthrough year. That's what we were calling it. We could see it, we could taste it, we could feel it. And now that is just, all basically gone away.
but coffee producers have no time to waste. This year's harvesting season is well underway, while millions of dollars worth of last year's crop sits in limbo. Although Hawaii is primarily known for its Kona coffee, the crop is grown on 5 islands in 8 regions, and there are nearly 1,000 coffee farms throughout the state.
Coffee's always been part of my life, I think since I was about 8.
That's Lou. He's the general manager of Ka'u Coffee Mill.
So we have unique weather and we have great soils down here. We have very cool evenings, very warm days. And what that does, it puts a lot of sugars into our coffee.
Before that coffee gets poured into someone's cup, it gets harvested from a coffee plant like this one. Harvesting is a labor-intensive process, with a countdown once the coffee cherries ripen.
We have to do something with it immediately. It only lasts 24 hours.
When coffee cherries ripen, they are hand-picked and loaded into 100-pound bags. The majority of Lou's coffee cherries go into what's called the washed process, where they are converted into parchment.
Basically entails going through a flotation tank. From there, it's going to get sucked up into the pulper. That's where we remove the skin in the pulp. From there, it goes into a demuseler. Once it goes through the demuseler, we have removed all that slimy pectin layer. It goes into another flotation tank, and then it's going to be transported over to the drying deck. When it comes out of that process, comes out of the wet mill, it's 46% moisture. You got to dry that down to 9 to 12%.
After drying in the open overnight, the parchment is loaded into a mechanical dryer for 24 hours.
Then we can move it into our warehouse.
Lou estimates that he has approximately 90,000 pounds of coffee parchment in his warehouse, waiting for the final steps.
We store it until we need to mill it into green bean.
When Lou is ready to convert the parchment into green bean, it heads to the dry mill.
That dry milling process does several things. So first, it's going to hull it, it's going to polish it, then it goes into a classifier, which pulls out all the different sizes.
From there, the green bean heads to the gravity table. Beans that are too light because they are overripe, underripe, or damaged by pests float to the top and are discarded. The rest of the top grade product continues on to the optical sorter, which removes any remaining impurities.
Coffee is one of those products that any little defect is going to throw off your cup.
This is what will eventually get roasted and become what we know as coffee. In a normal season, Ka'u Coffee Mill will produce close to 160,000 pounds of green bean, which gets sold to coffee shops and roasters throughout the state and internationally.
It was up 30% over last year, and then the pandemic hit.
The pandemic took hold just as last year's harvest was ending in Ka'u. While farms in regions like Kona wrapped up their harvest in late December, the harvesting season in Ka'u runs through March and April.
So when this pandemic hit, most of the Kona folks kind of had gotten rid of their crop already. Where we were just starting to sell, I generally sell most of my bulk product in the first quarter of the year. And by that time, things were already shutting down across the globe. And so that causes a lot of issues.
Lou was also forced to close the retail shop on March 19th.
I estimate that's roughly a little over $600,000 in lost revenue that we've had just because our visitor center has been shut down.
To make matters worse, This year's harvesting season has already begun, while they are still trying to sell off last year's product. And the longer that coffee sits in the warehouse, the less valuable it becomes.
As that coffee sits there, that's now become old crop, and so it gets devalued. It's a huge blow to our bottom line.
Although Ka'u Coffee Mill grows and harvests coffee from its 86 acres of fields, it also buys coffee cherry from local farmers. But now that demand for coffee has dropped, Lou has been put in a difficult position.
I depend on these guys to sell me coffee, and they depend on me to buy it. So it's kind of this whole symbiotic relationship. And, when one part of that whole system gets disrupted, it can be devastating for the folks down the line.
I don't know how long more I can survive without help.
That's Leo. He owns a coffee farm just down the road from Ka'u Coffee Mill, where he harvests about 250,000 pounds of coffee cherry every year.
The people that I supply, they don't order coffee. Because of the pandemic, I lose about $20,000 every month, and now we start harvesting again.
For both Lou and Leo, much of the drop in demand for Hawaiian coffee can be attributed to one factor: a dramatic decline in tourists. Unlike countries in South and Central America, which can produce coffee at a fraction of the cost and ship their products around the world, the Hawaiian coffee industry is dependent on tourism, and visitor spending totaled nearly $18 billion in 2019. But this summer was different. Visitor arrivals to Hawaii in July 2020 fell by almost 98% compared with the same month last year.
People come here specifically because they've either heard about us through family and friends, or they've read about us, or they follow us on our website.
Like the retail shop at the mill, many of the businesses Lou and Leo sell their coffee to are dependent on tourists as well. And as visitors to Hawaii dropped, so did the store's demand for coffee.
Back in February, we were having one of our best years ever. And then all of a sudden, somebody opened a trap door and we've been in a free fall since then.
Nick is the owner of one of those stores. He started Maui Coffee Roasters almost 40 years ago.
It was established for a need to roast Kona coffee at that time. From there, we just grew.
Maui Coffee Roasters buys coffee from farms throughout Hawaii, which it then roasts and sells in-store and to local grocery stores and cafes. One of those farms it buys from is Ka'u Coffee Mill.
We buy green coffee from them in 100-pound sacks. The normal season would go anywhere from 50 to 100 bags. And right now we're down to, I think we just got in 10 bags. At first we said, well, I guess it's time to close the business. But after a couple meetings, we decided we're going to try to weather it out.
Though coffee shops have resumed service, tourists have not resumed traveling, which means fewer sales for everyone.
If we don't make it by January, we might not be here.
An operation this size takes a lot of folks to keep it running, and we need a certain amount of revenue to keep this operation going.
Unfortunately, Lou, Nick, and Leo have not gotten much help from the state or federal governments. Although all three received PPP loans in the spring, the operating costs of their businesses meant that money didn't last long.
We blew through that PPP money really quick, because there wasn't that much.
One time, they gave me $10,000, but I spent only 1 week, no more, so I need some more help.
And while coffee farmers were included in the latest round of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, getting help might not be as easy as it seems.
Because of the requirements and what they're asking of the farmers, a lot of these folks aren't going to be able to glean money from that program, nor are we, because of the way the wording is in that.
For folks in Ka'u, their only hope of returning to normal operations depends on tourists returning to the islands. And fortunately, visitors might soon be arriving. Starting October 15th, visitors who test negative for COVID-19 within 72 hours of arriving in Hawaii can avoid a 2-week quarantine period.
It's created a whole new atmosphere here just by the people that live here. Everybody's got this hope.
All I can say is that Ka'u is a very strong district. The people are strong. They have a long history of being fighters. I know that tourism will eventually come back to Hawaii. I don't think it's going to be a quick rebound. It's going to be a slow recovery, but we will recover.
1 drop of habanero per spoonful of vanilla ice cream. It's amazing.
Yes, I would put triple pineapple on my pizza.
It's anything that has jalapenos.
Tabasco and peanut butter is the sneaky great thing that most people don't know about.